uniform. I heard a voice.
Yeah, that was I turned on the recording. So we're
Oh,
talking about Vietnam. We'll have things that maybe you could remember or go back and look up or whatever. So
uh, you
okay,
want me to go ahead and start?
yeah,
Well, in any case, I was working in Tactical Air Command headquarters at Langley Air Force Base, and I got orders saying you're going to Vietnam and fly RF-4 Phantom reconnaissance aircraft. And I said, "Uh-oh." And it sounds funny, but the year before, I was offered by General Shanafella to go with him to Vietnam, and I refused. And here I am a year later going to RF-4s. Well,
right.
but I had like 4 years in Tactical Air Command Headquarters Intelligence, and apparently they are looking for briefers to brief General Baumeier in Vietnam. And on my way, they canceled my orders to the RF-4s and said I was coming to 7th Air Force headquarters. And this is in December of 1968.
Okay,
So I landed just after Christmas in Vietnam and walk into the 7th Air Force headquarters. And they said, "You are now the I Corps analyst." And I said, "Where's I Corps?" And they said, "Well, that's the part of the most portion of Vietnam, and that you're now the expert on the I Corps, and we want you to brief General Momeyer every morning on what's going on there." So I ran, got a desk, and looked at all the messages that were coming in about what was happening in Vietnam. And the next morning at 8 o'clock, I stood up nice and fresh and told them that so many words I was a new guy. And I'm the first one on up in front of the whole staff of multiple generals and colonels and other people like that. My first briefing, I guess I did all right. They didn't fire me, but in any case, the next few days I would brief about what was going on in Vietnam. There's a lot happening around Khe Sanh, Vietnam, which was up near the border and where the U.S. Marines were held up with a large contingent. And the VC, Viet Cong, is word for VC, and the North Vietnamese regulars were moving around the Khe Sanh and firing, but nothing was particularly happening up there that was serious, although it was kind of tough on the Marines inside the Khe Sanh area. And the idea was to get them to come there and fire on the Marines to keep them busy. Well, it turned out that they moved in something like 40,000 men around Khe Sanh, but they did not really attack till much later in large numbers. That was the main thing going on. And each morning I would brief the generals about how it appeared that the North Vietnamese were building a road from the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is the northern part of Vietnam and Laos,
mhm,
into I Corps towards Da Nang. Da Nang was our big air base there, but also the Navy had
Major.
a shipping area where they offloaded supplies. The Marines were there, the Koreans were there, and of course our own ARVN, which is the Army of Vietnam. So it was a very strong base in many ways with the F-4s from the Air Force, F-4s from the Marines, and a lot of helicopters and that kind of thing. It was like the biggest area in Vietnam for our troops in the north. And just north of there was the city of Hue, which was like the capital of that particular area with the large numbers of people in the city. Well, each day I would brief a little bit about this, what was going on there. There was things like sappers would come in and try to blow up buildings or edges, the defenses around the base. But it was nothing major going on. But I would brief the generals every morning about what was happening. That the Marines would tell us that they'd had seen some North Vietnamese moving into the area. There seemed to be a buildup of enemy forces coming into the area. There's about 30 miles outside of Da Nang, there was a Marine base, and they would see the troops coming in. Well, then our road watch teams in Laos, watching the roads on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, were picking up large movements of North Vietnamese, including tanks and artillery weapons and so on. They said they'd never seen such a large buildup. So I started briefing General Mulmeyer what the road wash teams were saying. And we also were picking up the fact that the radio broadcasts were coming closer and closer to Da Nang and Hue. So we could see this buildup occurring, and I started. Well, besides my job was to brief the generals about 8 o'clock in the morning, first guy on this broadcast, and then write a daily 7th Air Force intelligence message of what was going on. And I thought it was going mostly to our bases in Vietnam. Well, I learned later that this daily Air Force message that I again was first because I was in my I Corps analyst. I'm saying that there's a buildup of the enemy forces. And they explained to me that the big date in Vietnam at the end of January is the Tet. And Tet is like Christmas and New Year's and all rolled into one. It was an exciting time for the ARVN, the Army of Vietnam. And we had a couple of Army of Vietnam officers in the intelligence area where I was working, and they were saying, "Oh, Tet is great. We're going home to I think you're going to Quang Ngai City to go home for like Christmas, like the troops do here, but they do it in Tet." Well, I said, well, if you think about it, it's an important time for the enemy to attack when all the soldiers leave their units and go home. So I started writing these messages. It looks like the enemy's going to attack around Tet, and they're building up their forces, and there's tanks on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and being a young captain, I was kind of excited about how strong the enemy was. Well, what I didn't know is that General Westmoreland had just come from the United States and given briefing us on how we were winning the war and we were much stronger than the Vietnamese and that we didn't have to worry. And he was a big hero. And the and so it turns out that my message was exactly the opposite of what Westmoreland was saying to his troops and to the people in the United States. And I was called the liberal captain, and General Westmoreland called my boss, four-star General Mummeyer, to calm this liberal captain down. He's saying the exact opposite of what the generals are saying. And this message is going to the White House and all over the world, to all the units. And here I am, this young captain, writing all this information down and making it sound really strong, not realizing that I was saying what the generals didn't want me to say. Well, then General Momeyer called me in his office and said, calm it down a little bit. That you're scaring a lot of the generals. And Westmoreland called me up and chewed me out. And he said, I'm chewing you out. And I said, well, sir, I see this buildup going on. I've got to tell everybody about it. He said, well, just calm down some of your writing. So in any case, I still said they were going to attack around Tet in my messages. And I might explain that also the 2 corps, 3 corps, 4 corps all stated to some extent, but less than I was, that there was a buildup of enemy forces and that their intercepts also indicated the enemy was moving closer to the various major cities and bases.
George, just once again, the base you were stationed at, it wasn't Da Nang. Was it Da Nang or
I
was it
was I was stationed at 7th Air Force headquarters in Saigon,
oh, Saigon? Okay, okay,
and it was right next to MacV, which
right,
is
okay,
where Westmoreland was located.
right.
And Westmoreland and all the generals would have meetings, and apparently I was being talked about as why is this
Young captain.
captain? And they called me the liberal captain, which I never thought of myself as a liberal, but in any case, they were not happy with me. Let's put it that way.
Okay, so your service time in Vietnam was January of 1968 through,
Yeah. Well, actually, I got there in 67, end of 67, but it's all 68 is when I was spent my year there.
and you were there during Tet 68,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Okay.
So I was treated kind of like, this not very well, that I was essentially taking the side of the enemy if you think about it. And a lot of people didn't like that, particularly the generals.
Well, if the generals were screwing up the war,
Well,
I guess they wouldn't like it if you're telling the truth.
so on the 29th or so, I kept in contact with our people at Da Nang, particularly the Marines, and they were telling me that they see a big buildup and that they captured some underwater sappers trying to blow up the bridge there, and they also captured a VC team that was going around making drawings of all the various defenses around the base. And they happened to see them and they shot them and killed two of the three VC. And the third one had all these drawings of all the key facilities around Da Nang. And so they knew that which I briefed the generals, that there's something up there, that they're taking all this information like a big attack is going to come. Well, General Maumeier was smart enough that he put all of our Air Force bases on full alert based on what I was saying and really ignoring Westmoreland. Now, Westmoreland came out on the 28th of January asking for a ceasefire in the whole area for Tet. And I'm writing that the enemy's going to attack. So I'm like, not really realizing, well, I realized after a while because my colonels were talking to me, my everybody above me is talking to me, and I said, all I can tell you is I'm the analyst. I see the enemy coming. Should I not say anything? And they say, well, say what you think. I'd say that they did let me say
Uh,
that, just calm it down a little bit.
right, right. Well, yeah, there was. I know there was somebody in the army that basically said the same thing, and they almost got drummed out of the army for saying that.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, they had
Well,
the long range recon
well,
patrols.
that was another thing. I was thinking of getting out of the Air Force, so I really didn't care what they thought.
Yeah, that's the attitude to have.
And so so Westmoreland wants a ceasefire because in previous years the VC and the North Vietnamese had agreed to the ceasefire. Well, this year they didn't. So just before, I think it was on the 30th, Westmoreland uh, decided that since they didn't want the ceasefire, they wouldn't have it. Well, in any case, on the 30th, the the embassy was attacked in Saigon,
Right,
and a VC group overtook the embassy and killed our troops and so on. And it took, I don't know, 6 hours or so for us to get it back. And then there was different things happening around Da Nang, like just prior to a heavy attack. And the attack was decided by Ho Chi Minh that his troops were told, when I greet you for Tet, like you greet people at Christmas time he's greeting the troops at Tet. That's the order to attack. So that all the troops in Vietnam knew it was time to attack when they heard Ho Chi Minh give the order. Or she didn't say it was the order,
yeah,
but the troops knew it was the order, and then they began their attack all over Vietnam on just about every major city and every base that we had. Uh, they attacked frankly, with ferocity. Not only that, which was never brought up in the news, because my experience was that all the newsmen were at the bar drinking and not out with the troops. I never saw a reporter that was with the troops and was see actually what happened. They saw the whole war inside the bar. Well, in any case, uh, they attacked ferociously, but they would go into a town, and anybody who had anything to do with the government, which included school teachers and drivers and anybody connected with the South Vietnamese government, they would kill.
Yep.
And
Teachers, mayors, yeah,
in
all types of people.
in Way, the city of Way alone, they killed something like 6,000 people in a matter of hours and took over the city of Way and attacked our troops in Da Nang and many other bases. I was watching my I Corps mostly and attacked Khe Sanh more.
Yeah,
And and the first day or two, they made big gains, but then our forces kind of got organized because the army hadn't been warned the, the,
yeah.
that the war was
Been
coming,
back on
the
all fronts. Yep,
big attack was coming. Our forces that were on the bases held up quite well because they were had moved to the defenses and were ready for any attack. And thankfully, General Mulmeyer had given the order of an alert. In the first few days of Tet didn't go too well. They went into Da Nang quite a bit. They went not into our base, but into Da Nang City. They went into Quay Tring and parts of Saigon. And once we got organized and fought against them, we fought very brilliantly and hurt them pretty seriously. And for example, part of the story is that the three core analysts went to get weapons. We weren't allowed to have weapons because Saigon was, peaceful. And if we had were carrying weapons, it might scare the people. So we wanted to get weapons because the attack was coming any day now, and they refused to give us any weapons. So I spent the Tet Offensive without a weapon. That's not exactly true. It happened that a army major was leaving, and you can't carry weapons on the aircraft. And I bought his 45 caliber pistol with pearl handles for $100, and that was my weapon. I might point out that I was also an escort shot with M16 and pistols, and I was ready for a fight, but I never got in one. In
yeah,
any case, for about 3 or 4 days, we were briefing the general, and I was actually living in 7th Air Force headquarters rather than going home, and briefing them like every 4 hours what was happening in the war. Uh, James Murphy and I were mostly briefing all the time what was going on. Well, then about the fourth day, things started getting better in the war. It seemed like we were winning. And interesting thing happened. These ARVN soldiers that went home were being attacked in their own home towns. And they fought brilliantly to protect their own families. so, so that turned out to be an advantage rather than a disadvantage, breaking up some of these units. And of course, there's enough of the units to stay back, plus our Marines. Well, we had almost 500,000 men there, or more than 500,000. So we were doing a lot of the fighting, and our aircraft were doing well. And on the base, a regiment broke through at Tonsanute Force Base and was moved down into the center of the airfield. And interestingly, about 700 North Vietnamese are on the airfield ready to attack our buildings. And we call in the gunships from Benoit, and the uh, regiment commander is shot out on the runways. And there's no one below him willing to give the order to attack into the MACV headquarters. And the gunships come out and just slaughter them. 500 to 700 men. We had piles of NVA soldiers killed out there. And that kind of thing happened all over where the they were attacking and our units with their gunships and helicopters and fighter bombers, plus the men on the ground and the artillery, just fought the um, VC and North Vietnamese back. And they eventually started retreating, except in Hue. They stayed in Hue for about 3 weeks and stayed on part of Saigon for about a week before they pulled back, seriously hurt, uh, many wounded, and hundreds dead. I saw pictures of piles of NVA dead, all in their uniform. And one interesting thing is some of the soldiers were telling me we wanted the newspaper people to come out and see all the dead NVA people to see how we are winning the war, but they wouldn't leave their bars to tell the story. And the story came to the United States that we were being defeated by the North Vietnamese, and instead we were winning, overcoming them. And even after the war, General Giap and Ho Chi Minh both said that if we had attacked the North at that time, there was no soldiers left essentially to stop our attacks.
Yep.
That unfortunately that order was never given because the politicians in Washington didn't want us to get into a bigger war with possibly the Chinese coming in to protect North Vietnam. But we could have gone in and at least slaughtered what was left of the North Vietnamese army in Laos and in Cambodia, where they ran off, where we had some rule that we couldn't attack. And that was
Yeah,
one of the things
the
about,
promise was made that we would never invade North Vietnam.
well,
Silly us.
people don't realize that even when we bombed in Vietnam, first it would go to the White House, and Johnson or White House people would decide where you could bomb and if you could bomb and when you could bomb. And often for months at a time, they would stop bombing and like fighting against Vietnam. It was a crazy, crazy war that we, in my opinion, and many of the Marines and soldiers and sailors said that we could have won if we decided to win. Of course, you might have had the Chinese come in large numbers, and that's what they wanted to avoid. So I can see that argument.
Also, we weren't going to infringe upon the sovereignty of Laos or Cambodia. So we couldn't even at the early stages go after the Ho Chi Minh Trail. that they use like a
Right.
super highway.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate situation.
Well,
I think
Tet 68, I guess you could say we won militarily, but we lost the war during that because we lost the war at home.
we certainly lost the war at home. And people should be aware that whenever there's an enemy, our news is usually on the side of the enemy.
Yeah, still is.
And even today, uh, this is getting off the subject, but I watch the news every night. I watch David Muir and I watch Fox. On David Muir, it says, "Oh, those ICE people are hurting the poor people who are farmers," and they raided the this farm, and they arrested a bunch of people, and there was all these protesters against ICE and so on. They made it sound like ICE was the bad guys. Well, when you turn on Fox, it said, well, the place where they raided had a bunch of children working on the farms, but they never mentioned that on the regular news that there was a lot of children, illegal children from, these various countries working on the farms.
And that's all hidden. Project Mockingbird. There's 100 journalists that are on the payroll of one of our institutions that represents the propaganda. If you want to put propaganda out, go to these 100.
Uh,
They control the narrative. Yep. It's
and
been
they,
that way for years, too.
pardon me?
I said it's been that way for years,
Yeah,
going back to the 50s.
yeah. Uh,
So back to Vietnam. When you left Vietnam, when did you leave? That was
uh, just before Christmas of '68.
okay. All right. Um,
Oh, one of the things I wanted to mention is that in Da Nang, there's a Korean unit on the southeast section of the base, and that's where they uh, put most of their attack against Korean soldiers, and
oh,
they
Bronx.
lost. I don't know how many they lost, but they said there was heavy casualties. In the rest of the line, there's only like 14 Americans killed, and they claim something like 1,200 NVA killed on on the defenses of Da Nang. Uh, there was also in my writing and briefing every day, I was talking about the PT-76 Soviet-built tanks that were coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that I suspected that with the war going bad, that the North Vietnamese would put the PT-76 into the battle, and wrote this in my messages, and this was the reason that Westmoreland called Mumbai and chewed him out again in saying that there's never been tanks brought into the battle by the North Vietnamese, and they wouldn't do it again. And so on 7 February, they attacked Lang Vei, which is up on the northern border, with a dozen PT-76 tanks, and the one tank was sitting over the headquarters of Lang Vei's Army headquarters, and he's broadcasting out that there's tanks over the top of us. In any case, it was interestingly that as the result of the war, we we did not attack in Laos and Cambodia or North Vietnam like most of us wanted to. We had the forces that were able to, and I think Westmoreland wanted to as well. But he asked for 200,000 more men in Vietnam, and when President Johnson saw that, one, he decided to quit and not run for a second time, and he fired Westmoreland and hired General Abrams. And I don't know if this had anything to do with what I had written, but a lot of things happened
Well, a
after Tet was over.
secret attack what happened on his watch.
Right.
He's
Well,
going to pay the price.
right. Well, it happened on his watch. Yeah.
Yep.
I never got to meet Westmoreland, but I got to know General Mulwire pretty well.
Yeah. But you know that, like I said, the Tet 68, we ended up winning the battle. We could have won the war, but instead we lost the war at home, and that was it. There was no way. Matter of fact, that's the reason they didn't follow him up, because they knew that politically it would be suicide. That the American people had given up on us. You
Well,
know,
the American people were given the wrong
yeah, wrong
information,
information. Yep.
which they frequently are,
And they
even
they
today.
blame the warfighter as opposed to blaming the enemy or the enemy within.
I never looked at my notes, like looking at your picture.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, the most people to this day do not understand the Vietnam conflict. I refuse to call it a war because it was never declared. Only Congress can declare a war. So this was one of those mealy mouth police actions like Korea and then what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq. We still have no victory to claim other than the fact that Saddam Hussein's not there, you know. So well, I think what we have to do is look at that. If we're going to fight ever again, better darn well make sure we want to fight to win, and that we're in it to win it,
Right?
and not just playing footsie with the enemy. And our people have to be engaged in it. They have to be part of it at some visceral level. They have to have skin in the game. And I think that's the takeaway that most veterans of Vietnam feel to varying degrees, maybe. But for the most part, I think most will agree that it was fought the wrong way, probably for the wrong reasons, because we didn't understand the enemy. We didn't understand how the enemy was thinking, or even that if you're a communist in Vietnam, do you like the communists in China? And apparently they didn't, because right after the fall of Saigon, China and North Vietnam and Vietnam fought.
Yeah.
The 2 month war, and the Chinese got a bloody nose from it, and they never fought again. So I think that's a lesson that should be shared with the world as well. You know, don't make assumptions unless you absolutely know the truth. You know what you're dealing with.
And it's some question if the Chinese would have actually come across the border like our politicians were afraid of.
Well, there was always a possibility, but then again, if you're in a war to win it, and you got to be willing to go the whole 9 yards. I mean, if you do it piecemeal, you know, we tried strengthening the South Vietnamese, but they had no chance. They were outnumbered 2-1 by the North. North Vietnam had twice as many people as the South, so you couldn't even have or you could have fair elections, but the North would have won because the communists like Ho Chi Minh, and the South was backing people like Diem, who were not popular with their own people. So I
Right.
mean, yeah, that was a rock and a hard place, and even to the point where Ho Chi Minh's life was saved by an American soldier during World War II while we were fighting against the Japanese and freeing that Southeast Asia from Japanese rule. So
Well, even after Tet Khe continued on, and some we went in there with all kinds of fighter bombers, F-4s from Da Nang and Tanzania, and when the North Vietnamese had a big buildup around Khe Sanh, they moved the B-52s in, and they really decimated them. They estimated as high as 40,000 uh,
NVA
NVA
were
died by the B-52 raids. And it was interesting that the Air Force came down with a question. That sounds funny, but should they continue the B-52 raids into Vietnam? And since I had been part of the B-52 raids in at Khe Sanh, they said, finally, your job is to evaluate the B-52 raids. And
bomb damage, BDA.
bomb damage, BDA, and I got a lot of bomb damage photography of what the B-52s do, which is if you're in the wrong place, you're in bad trouble.
Right.
They just rip the areas to shreds in long trains of bombs, one after another, I don't know, 25, 30 feet deep holes in the ground. If anybody was there, they were long gone. Anyways, I recommended that they continue the raids. Oh, the reason they had asked that was that some B-52s had crashed. They had run together and crashed, and they lost the B-52s not from enemy action, but from uh,
Collisions. Yeah,
poor piloting, I guess you would say.
yeah, mid-air collisions.
And
Any of the crews survive?
uh, I, I think some bailed out, as I heard. I don't know their final status.
The only mutiny in the U.S. Navy happened during the Cambodian incursion in
What was that?
1970. Yeah, we were bombing. This is during the Cambodian incursion. We had arc light raids were being
Right.
performed all over the place, and the B-52s. There were bombs that were being taken into Thailand to support the B-52s that were coming out of Thailand, and a whole shipload of bombs. I don't know if they were 500-pound bombs or whatever was the standard bomb load for a B-52 doing the carpet or the arc light raids. But the whole ship was hijacked by two mutineers, and they held the captain at gunpoint. And this was a U.S. Navy chartered ship. So essentially, it's the only or the first mutiny involving the U.S. Navy. Well, anyway, the mutineers put 17 crew members over the side in the Gulf of Siam, and they took the ship and took it into Cambodian waters. And this was during the overthrow of Nordam Sihanouk by Lon Nol. And so we're at the 12-mile limit because we were the closest asset. And we had orders to go in, board the ship, and arrest the mutineers, and then repatriate the ship. Well, mutineers were threatening to blow that ship up with all the bombs on it. So that wasn't a happy moment for those of us that were on the boarding teams. And we got our orders from actually directly from Admiral Zumwalt, who was Comp FISAC, And then they were countermanded just as we were moving in to board them. We had our small boats over the side. I was a communications guy on one of the boarding teams, and we were just getting ready to go in, and we got a countermanding order from John McCain's father. Admiral McCain was the head of the Seventh Fleet, and he was in communication with President Nixon. And they decided, because now the New York Times had leaked that the Cambodian incursion was in place, so there was going to be all types of hell to pay for the violation of the non going into Cambodia. So we were told to stand fast and wait for a Navy squadron consisting of a cruiser, two destroyers, and an LSD with two companies of Marines on board that were to relieve us, and they would take care of the ship. We got a Navy unit citation for that event. So yeah, but again, this is all it was all public relations stuff back home that stopped us from doing what needed to be done in theater.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, well, why the news media is always so much against the war. Of course, those guys sitting in the reporters sitting in the bar drinking didn't want to be there either. So maybe they made it sound bad.
Yeah, yeah, that could be. It definitely could. Joe Gallo's the exception. Joe Gallo, he was a gallant reporter. He actually went in with Hal Moore at the Battle of the Idrang Valley, and he was there. He had to defend himself. He had to pick up a weapon and defend himself even. Yeah, he's an interesting guy. He and Moore were they were quite a pair, quite a pair. Uh, but all the rest of the reporters that showed at the end of the movie, if you watch the movie, all these reporters are getting off one of the big Chinooks, and they're all coming over, and there's a friendly round goes off in the distance, and they all duck. And Joe Gallo said, "Relax, it's friendly fire." Yeah, that was yeah, there's a lot. The stories that came out of Vietnam, like your story, George, that is so important, because if they were prepared for the Tet attack for Tet 68, it would never have gotten as far as it did.
But
But General Giap and the North Vietnamese, I think they had excellent leadership. General Giap, I believe, was probably the finest commanding officer, combat officer in Vietnam. He was an interesting character himself. Yeah.
well, they thought that there would be an uprising with Tet, that the people would
Yeah, Rise Up
rise up, but
never
that didn't
happened.
work. Obviously, it didn't happen.
No, but again, we always misread the tea leaves. Also, General Giap, he wrote a book, and he even said the Viet Cong were an afterthought, but we put all of our effort into worrying about the Viet Cong. When it was the North Vietnamese Army, and they were going to fight a conventional war just like World War II. And when Hal Moore won the first part of the battle for the Idrang Valley, Yap said, "It's a shame. Now it's an American war. They think they won, but it doesn't make any difference." He said, "We can lose 600,000, and we don't care, because we're going to continue to fight until we prevail." And that's exactly what happened. Because when at the end of the battle for the Idrang Valley, to the end of the war, over 2.5 million people died in Vietnam, 58,000 and change in Americans, and all the rest in the civilians and everything else. But the outcome was exactly the same. If we didn't fight and we let them vote, the country would have become communist, but they would have hated the Chinese. Just right now, do you see the ship in my background? My ship is now in the Vietnamese Navy. Yep. It was the first time it went to Vietnam was I was on it 50 some years ago. Now it was the last of the cutters, my cutter, that type cutter, that was decommissioned. And it was also now sent over to the Vietnamese. and they got two others just like it. They loved my ship. So it
Well,
must have been something good about the ship. They
we
got,
were told there was 16 million new North Vietnamese per year that were born, if you think about it, and
okay, it's a
that
small country. That's a lot of people. They're filling up
they could
fast.
lose
Yeah.
theoretically 16 million a year. And
Also, a lot of
it indicates even if only 8 million are military, that's a lot of men you could put in the military.
yeah, absolutely.
And I used to go to prison camps and interview some of the prisoners, which were VC/NVA. And they would say that, and a lot of them said this, I don't know how true it is, but I assume it's true, that they were sitting in their village one day and in walks, marches a group of North Vietnamese soldiers, and anyone of age to be in the military was drafted, and usually the mayor and a few of the top people in the town were killed, and then the people would, you might say, send their sons to fight for North Vietnam or for the Viet Cong. That they had no particular interest in fighting or being in the army or being on one side or the other. They just wanted to stay home in their little village. They
Yeah,
didn't want to go into war.
grow their rice, and they were apolitical, I guess you could say.
Right.
Yeah, that's, I mean, again, even though when I went over, they took us and they gave us 6 hours of instruction on what to do and what not to do, when we met with the Vietnamese people and all. And they tried to give us an indication of what the history of the people, because everybody over there is different. A Thai is not Vietnamese, a Lao is not a Thai, Malays are Malays, and so each
Right.
one has their own perspective. They have their own politics. They have their own, uh, you know, the things that are important. When I was there, the time you were there, did you ever get to R&R any place? Did you ever get out of the city or?
Yeah, I went to Hong Kong.
Okay, yep, Hong Kong, great R&R port. Yep. What about Bangkok? Did you ever make it to Krung Thep?
Yeah, I went to Bangkok too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I was there, it turned out that it seemed like the Thai people were the friendliest towards Americans. They really, I think they really liked Americans there. Maybe they liked our money because we used to go in and buy a lot of stuff from them, but they actually truly liked us. Never felt that they were just tolerating you or abusing you.
Yeah, they always acted like they liked me, but
Yeah, yeah. No, and I'll tell you, I don't know how you feel, George, but I would not trade my experience going to Vietnam for anything in the world or going into the service. I think it was one of the greatest things I could have ever done. I'm proud of every minute. Hey, I had my time when I wasn't happy there, but I think I learned more about myself and the world around me because I had that experience. You know, I honestly and truly believe that. So.
yeah, I didn't like getting chewed out by colonels and generals. Yeah, that
Yeah, well, getting chewed out, that could be fun too if you think about it.
well, afterwards it was fun. Then I was a hero, but
Yeah, yeah. Did they ever say anything to you after Tet that you were right? And did they ever
yeah.
give you
Well,
a
General Mumar never did, but few
I thought
colonels.
Westmoreland didn't, huh?
Colonel North did said I was right all along. That I was strong for. I knew Colonel North at Tactical Air Command headquarters, and he went over the same time I did, and so he was I don't know why he wasn't intelligence, but in any case,
Because he
he's
was combat. He liked jumping off of garage roofs.
he was nice about things. And later on, after the well, I took like a month doing the evaluating the B-52s, and they after that they made me four corps analyst because I had I don't know 4 months left in the by that time we had a new general, General George Brown, and I had briefed him for a month or two, and they got a new major who was, put it frankly, was really a good briefer, better than me, and he briefed all four corps for General Brown, and General Brown later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for 4 years. And he was real nice to me.
Yeah,
And I don't know if he asked for a different briefer, but they took this major.
yeah,
And then and what they did is they flew him around to all the bases, and he would talk to the Air Force squadron commanders at the bases or the wing commanders, and to get the latest information on what was going on in the war, and he would bring that back and brief the general. He gave good briefings.
okay, yeah,
Now I flew down to Four Corps, and a lot of that had to do with the Mekong River and the swift boats and so
yep,
on.
yep. And the
And
SEAL base, I supported a Navy SEAL base at the mouth of the Sonodock River that was
and
getting hit every other night.
so I got in with the swift boat people and talked to them and everything. And I said, "Yeah, well, see, I would brief in the command frequently in the command post and knew what they wanted. And the command post wanted targets for the Air Force. We had all kinds of airplanes and troops, pilots ready to go with equipment and everything, but no real targets. Well, in any case, I'm asking those swift boats, what's the targets? Who when you go along the river, where do you get shot up and stuff?
Hmm.
Well, there's one area where there's a divide in the river, and on this peninsula was a big Arvin, not Arvin, North. I don't know if it's North Vietnam or Viet Cong base, but in any case, it was the enemy that shot up the swift boats all the time. And so I had our helicopter fly over it, and they were shooting at us. So I go back to the command post, walked in there, and I said, I got a target for all you guys.
Right.
And I gave him the coordinates of the target. And a Navy guy is standing there and he says, what's that target? What's that target? They said, that's within our range of our, they had a destroyer or something off the coast.
Oh, the 5-inch 38 caliber deck gun.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, we used to get those fire missions too. The helicopter, well, actually, the SEAL base, they
yeah,
had these sensors throughout the jungles, and they were marked on the combat, the military grid maps.
right,
And whenever they called it duffel bags, and whenever they got duffel bag activity, which is it's a radio and they pick up signals from various sensors, so they knew where people were. Yeah, and
right.
after 8 o'clock at night, nobody was supposed to be moving in the jungle. If you were
I'm
moving
gonna
in
have,
the jungle,
Ron, I've got an appointment.
oh, you have an appointment?
Yeah, I have to make.
Okay, well, we got a good hour talk here. We can continue at some point.
Right.
Maybe I'll get this over to the Vietnam Memorial and Museum.
Right.
We collect Vietnam histories from various servicemen. So
Okay. Well, we're glad to do
got a lot there.
it. Talk about UFOs on Vietnam.
Next one. Next one. Okay, George, we'll catch you later.
Okay. Bye bye.
Bye now.